Over the years, people with an addiction were thought to be morally flawed or even lacked the willpower to resist it. These views continue to shape the society's response to drug use rather than treat it as a health problem. My name is Gloria Milimo, and on this episode of Health Digest, we look at how science is helping change the perception around drug addiction and the medical interventions to treat it. Substance addiction is perhaps the most stigmatized condition the world over. For the millions of people who struggle through it every day, quitting is not just a matter of willpower. And now, scientists are only beginning to understand why. In recent years, research in this area has shown that substance abuse causes changes in brain function, and that could end up impeding actions of decisions by those hooked to it. For people like Rita Gatonye, a resident of Nairobi who started experimenting with drugs back in 2015, its prolonged use caused her brain to stop making enough dopamine, a chemical released in the brain when something good happens, giving an addict some form of pleasure, also known as euphoria.
I started experimenting with drugs as anyone would in campus, as campus students usually do. So you've left high school and you've gone to campus and you suddenly have this freedom and you want to try things. So I started trying. Of course, what people try first is weed, cannabis. So I tried cannabis. I enjoyed that for a while, and then looking back, I was self-medicating for something that I later discovered was an issue, was a mental health issue.
Neuroscientists say the brain contains a structure known as the ventral tegmental area, or simply VTA, which is responsible for regulating reward consumption, learning, memory, and addiction behaviors by mediating the dopamine released in downstream regions of the body. They further explained that prolonged abuse of alcohol and opioids affects the brain's reward system due to the less amount of dopamine produced in the brain. Starved of the important chemical, the brain is forced to fuel the urge to get more euphoria. Unfortunately for many, like in this case of Gatonye, that euphoria comes in the form of substance abuse, and before they know it, they are hooked.
Looking back, I realized that I had been diagnosed with something called attention deficit hyperactive disorder, which is a chemical imbalance in the brain that has people having a shortage of dopamine. Dopamine is what, I'm sure it's what controls motivation, thrill seeking. So then I was using marijuana, and I was taking medication for the ADHD. And then at some point, the person who was selling marijuana to me decided to give me something else to try, because I was such a good client. So he said, you're a very good client. You give me business. So let me give you this powder. So I tried it, and I thought it was cocaine, because I had tried cocaine before somewhere. So I thought it was cocaine. Turns out it was heroin. So I took the heroin. I took the heroin for about a week, just having fun, enjoying myself in campus. And before I knew it, it was difficult to stop taking it. So I continued taking it, and before I knew it, I found myself in a problematic place, because now it became a question of, am I going to spend my pocket money on the things I'm supposed to spend it on, or am I going to spend it on heroin? The withdrawals when you're using opioids are very painful. So you never want to be in a position where you don't have the drug. You will always be looking for your next fix. It's a very sweet high, and that's why it's a dangerous high. So that went on for some time. I moved out of the hostel in campus. I moved somewhere else that was closer to where I could get the heroin. I dropped out of school because I wasn't able to sustain the habit, or even to concentrate long enough. Because when you don't have it, you feel sick.
Drugs are chemicals that affect neurotransmitters of the brain's reward system. But in most cases, using drugs can affect the reward system strongly. Just like in Gatonye's case, Nahashon Paul from Kiambu County also found himself in the vicious addiction cycle. What was meant to numb the pain from a marital breakdown that left him feeling dejected and unworthy developed into an urge that became too strong to control. He resorted to self-medication, or rather, drowning his sorrows in the futile and misadvised effort to regulate the intense negative emotions that emanated from the failed marriage.
At this point, actually, I was so stressed. I was so angered. Now, I opted kutumia drugs kunamb the pain, and that I think that's the biggest mistake I ever did. So I could just ningeamka asubuhi naenda napiga, nikikuja jioni na kuja kama nimetei, na bado nimebeba ile ya tumbo ikiisha kuna yenye naongezea nikienda kutafuta ingine. That was my life then. And with time actually nili have to withdraw from job. Sikujua nili withdraw. Same happened to my friends, my family wangenitafuta, madhenge ni call. You previously being that I always tell people, because being the only son in our family, kuna ile love unapewa, so una expect zile calls zinakuja continuous from home. So ilifika time hata madhe akinipigia simu sometimes naona ni kama ananisumbua. I just needed my freedom, so ungenipata mostly niko offline, sitaki kuongelesha wase. So my best friend at this time was alcohol. So I became a very hardworking alcoholic. It went on hadi kafika time nayo nilikuwa broke. So nikaona life ya Nairobi imekuwa ngumu, acha nirudi Ushago. So unajua Ushago vitu ni cheap. So hata kama utataka kupiga maji yako kidogo, Ushago vitu ni cheap kidogo, si kama huko Nairobi.
You see, when we engage in new rewarding behaviors, the brain also builds a connection between that behavior and related cues. In this case, alcohol was Paul's newfound love, but soon it became something else more powerful and consuming. It became his coping mechanism, some sort of a getaway from reality that tormented his very existence.
After getting home, now vitu zili escalate because therapeutically unaambiwa when you use drugs for therapeutic purposes, you actually worsen the condition. And I never knew this before, and at this time mimi nilidhani tu niko na stress as well, siko naona niko na hope ya life, because I wasn't seeing anything good, because you loved someone, mtu amekubetray na amekubetray na kitu uko expect anaweza kubetray nayo, you know. So I felt like no one ever loved me. I felt like I was that useless, you know. So I wasn't that productive at this time. I could spend much of my time in the drinking dens, having my drinks. So when I went home, ilifika time nikaanza kuwa suicidal. And it went on for some time because I attempted severally. I thank God that none was successful, and that's why I'm here today.
More often than not, people like Gatonye and her counterpart Paul, who is also a disc jockey, face a lot of stigma due to addiction. Questions like, why don't they just quit, often pop up whenever the effects of drugs start taking a toll on the user.
I was judged actually. I know of my friends wenye walikatazwa na wazazi wao wasitembe na mimi, wasionekane na mimi hata kidogo. Unaona, because wanasema kijana amesoma na ndio amerudi nyumbani sasa anakaa kama wazimu, you know. It was really hurting for me, but since hakuna time ungenipata niko sober, for me it never mattered that much at that time.
What it offered was solace. It was like it was a place of comfort from, you know, we grew up being told the world is not easy, but once you jump in and realize just how difficult it is, then you're always looking for an outlet. So it was a comfort for me from one, the idea that I had this chemical imbalance in my brain and that I had to take medication for it. So it was a comfort for me from the stigma of the mental health. Two, it was fun because, I'm in campus, I want to have fun. And then over time, it became comfort in that society has shunned you. There's a time a neighbor saw me on the street and went and told my mom, nimeona mtoto wako Marikiti akitembea akivuta sigara. For women the stigma is so much more. So I knew that as much as my people loved me, there's no way they were going to accept me, and there's no help I was going to get from them. So it was comfort in that, and also just being with other people who have similar issues, people who have either been chased from their homes because of having been seen to use drugs, even if it's cannabis or cigarettes or anything. So it was a comfort from the stigma from outside, and it was a comfort from the demons in my own mind.
Science shows that substance use disorders are complex, chronic, and treatable medical conditions that change how our brains operate. Dr. Ruth Korir is a psychiatrist at the Mathari Teaching and Referral Hospital in Nairobi, and she explains how this happens.
If you take a certain drug, so you'd find yourself, for example, if you take alcohol, you find yourself feeling very happy, you're feeling intoxicated, you're feeling that disinhibited, you probably want to do anything, even your judgment becomes impaired. So you're looking here, the functions of the brain have been affected. That is why we are saying it's a disease. When you look at CT scans of people who use heroin and those who don't use heroin, they have been shown to be total difference. There's a great comparison between the two. So that is already an evidence that addiction is a disease. Yeah.
She explains that the consequences of drugs are vast and varied. The drugs interfere with the way neurons, the electrical signals that transmit information to different parts of the brain, send, receive, and process the pulses via neurotransmitters.
If an individual takes a drug and feels euphoric and they like that feeling, they'll end up looking for that drug again so that they can get that excessive happiness feeling. The other thing is that there are people who are more predisposed to taking drugs than others. What we call, they have the genes they have a family history of drug use. So you find that if you have a father or a mother who has maybe alcohol dependency, chances of you getting the disease is higher because there's a genetic transfer of the alcoholic genes.
Addiction is not something you can switch on and off. And it's not something that anyone would want for themselves. And then it's also not something that just happens the minute you touch a drug that you're going to be an addict. What I wished first and foremost is that people would understand, one, that drugs are different drugs have different effects. I wish people knew what these things were so that I could talk about, I could say it's heroin and people don't get scared. To this day you say heroin like, ah! So I wish people knew what these things are. I wish people understood that the more you alienate somebody who is going through addiction, the more you push them into that same addiction, in fact, a worse version.
The chemical structure of some drugs like marijuana, known locally by the more common name bang, can activate neurons because it mimics that of a neurotransmitter. But there is a problem. As much as they activate the neurons, they don't do so in the same manner as a natural neurotransmitter. And this eventually leads to abnormal messages being sent through the brain network.
Drugs are classified under different types. There are drugs that make you, they're depressant. They make the brain work faster. Then there are drugs which are, there are drugs that make the brain go slow, what we call depressants. Then there are those drugs that alter the way you think, what we call hallucinogens. So depending on the type of drug, that is the effect you'll have in the body.
Experts say the long-term use of alcohol causes physical changes to the brain. Particularly, it shrinks and affects the ability of one to process information.
Alcohol is classified as antidepressant. So most likely the brain function will slow down. So you'd find also your judgment going, not becoming, your judgment is impaired, your concentration, even your speech. You find now people having a slow speech.
Given the science behind addiction, doctors are just beginning to understand why overcoming drug addiction proves so hard for some people. Winning oneself of substance addiction is often a lifelong journey that can take even years to achieve. Whereas most drug users want to quit the habit, withdrawal symptoms end up becoming the biggest hurdle in their recovery journey. Most of them, if not all, would rather continue using drugs to alleviate the withdrawal symptoms, some of which are life-threatening in their own sense and severity.
When you're deep in addiction, you'll do anything. You will steal even from the people that are closest to you. You will, it's a selfish condition. So there would be family events that everyone is at, but I'm not there just because, I need my fix and that's all I need. The turning point was one when I felt an urge to, I needed to get money for the drug, and my mom had left out some money, and I took 1,000 shillings. I don't think she's known that to this day. She'll know from this interview. So I took 1,000 shillings, and the guilt I felt, I said, kama nimefika mahali ya kuibia the one person who has stood with me, then something needs to change.
Nikienda kwa specialist, that's the time I was diagnosed with severe depression. So kupewa hizo how the recovery journey looks like and everything, I thought I can work it out by myself. So nilirudi home after a meeting, nikamwa how my life could be, because I came to realize ni mali lienda, ni bibi alienda, I can still get some other lady, I can still have some other kid, I can still work kujenga again venye life yangu inaweza buildika tena. So I stopped drinking, and that was one of I can say the best decision I ever made, but also the toughest, because sikuacha gradually, I stopped at once. So kuna hizi withdrawal signs maze, si mchezo. Ungenipata nimekaa na tetemeka na sweat, niko siyuko, and hizo episodes zote venye zilikuwa zinakuja kwa akili, for me it was never easy.
Repeated drug use creates even stronger connections to drugs and the cues associated with them, making it even more difficult to stop without professional help.
When you're looking at treatment of addiction, in our facility, we normally there's an inpatient and an outpatient setup. So for those cases which are very severe, normally we recommend for inpatient care, what we call the rehabilitation. Mostly we see patients who have alcohol dependence, cannabis dependence, what we call weed, bang, even chavis, even cigarettes. Then in the outpatient setup, we have two clinics. We have a clinic specifically for people who are dependent on opioids, things like heroin, cocaine, tramadol, such kind of drugs. Detoxification normally takes between 5 to 7 days, depending on the client. So here we give medication to the patient. So once the patient is stable, when I say stable, I mean they don't have any withdrawal symptoms, they are calm mentally, they're okay, we go now to the rehabilitation phase. Now, for someone to move from the detoxification to the rehabilitation phase, normally the psychologist also has to come in, because there's something we do, motivational interview. We want to gauge, does this patient really want to be rehabilitated? If they say yes, then we can comfortably move to the next stage of treatment, which is the rehabilitation phase. So in the rehabilitation phase, normally you have a lot of psychological interventions, a lot of counseling. So counseling is done at an individual basis, where you have you and your therapist talking one-on-one. Then you have then we have the group therapy. So in group therapy, you have many patients coming together with a similar illness, with someone, with the one, there must be a supervisor. Most likely it's the therapist who's supervising them. So here you find the patients are able to share their story, how they came to addiction. Then when the patients share their stories, so they're able to learn from each other, and they feel that they're together. This is a journey, we can do it. Then when you hear someone else's story and how they dealt with their issue, you can also copy that from the other patient. Then you also have spiritual therapy. But remember, spiritual therapy is dependent on the individual, because if someone wants to have spiritual intervention done, it's okay. If they don't want, it's okay. Then we also have occupational therapy. Remember, this is rehabilitation. So this, as much as we want to rehabilitate this patient mentally, we also want to rehabilitate them functionally. When they go out to the society after rehabilitation, what can they do? So you can find here is a point where they are taught skills, of what new skills, or even the skills that they had can be enhanced. So if it is tailoring, it is enhanced. If it is leather work, it is enhanced. It's just client-based.
A survey conducted by the National Authority for the Campaign Against Drug Abuse between September 1st and December 1st, 2022 indicates that Western Kenya has overtaken the coastal region in drug abuse prevalence. NACADA says that 23.8% of the population in Western Kenya is hooked on drugs and illicit brew, taking the mantle of dishonor from coast, which comes in at 13.9%. The highlands of central Kenya come in at third at 11.4%. That means 2 in every 10 people in Western Kenya are using, compared to just 1 in 10 in the coast and central regions. According to NACADA, about 4.9 million Kenyans, or about 17% of the population aged between 15 and 65, were using at least one drug or substance of abuse in 2017. 12.2%, or 3.2 million Kenyans, were using alcohol, while 8.3%, or 2.2 million, were using tobacco. Miraa or Cat came in at 4.1%, or 1.1 million, while Bang closed the list of disgrace at 1.0%, or 260,000 Kenyans hooked onto it. The survey further showed that 10.4%, translating to 2.8 million of Kenyans between 15 and 65 years, had an alcohol use disorder. 1.8 million had tobacco use disorders. 830,000 were addicted to Miraa, and slightly above 200,000 had Bang use disorders. According to NACADA, heroin is the second most widely used narcotic drug in Kenya after Bang.
There is a lot of stigma in the society, and also within the patients themselves. They have a lot of self-stigma. So the society normally views people with drug addiction that they are useless, they can't be helped, they can't contribute to the society. But when you look, personally, I've seen so many patients who've come back to me and said, Daktari, you helped me so much. And also, there are very many people who are advocates out there, that mental health advocates, that have spoken that addiction is not a disease, they're okay. We even have addiction counselors who were previously addicts, and they have changed and they have become addiction counselors. Yeah.
Years of understanding have given the medical community a better understanding of how addiction occurs, and that has given doctors the opportunity to manage this condition better and more effectively. Anyone can develop a substance use disorder, and similarly, no one chooses how their brain is going to react. There is no gainsaying that addiction is a real problem that people face every day. But with support and safe and effective medications, drug users can turn their life around and make positive changes. Gloria Milimu, KTN News.